After Doctor Who was cancelled in 1989, many attempts to bring the show back to our screens were made. A TV movie starring Paul McGann in 1996, novels, audio adventures, and even an animated incarnation played by Richard E. Grant. But in 2003, it was announced that Doctor Who was to return to its rightful place on BBC One Saturday nights. But how did this once beloved, now shunned television show return with such critical acclaim? This is the story of how Doctor Who came back.
It won't be quiet, it won't be safe, and it won't be calm, but I tell you what it will be. Trip of a lifetime.
Before we discuss how Doctor Who came back, we must explain why it got cancelled in the first place. In the late 1980s, Doctor Who was consistently shunned by the higher-ups of the BBC. In 1985, after Colin Baker's first season, it was put on hiatus. Michael Grade, the controller of BBC One, initiated this 18-month hiatus, citing his dislike for the violent content, storylines, and low ratings. This hiatus led to many fan campaigns to bring the show back, including the now infamous charity single, Doctor in Distress. The show did return after its 18-month hiatus, but the charity single played no part in that return. When Michael Grade stood down as controller to work at Channel 4, contempt for the show continued. Peter Cregan, the BBC's new head of serials, decided to cancel the series. This decision was made during the production of season 26, which would become the final season of Doctor Who. At this point, Sylvester McCoy was the 7th incarnation of the Doctor. The production team was aware of this as being only a rumour, but by the time of filming Survival, the production team were aware that it would be fact. Doctor Who was to end. John Nathan Turner, the then producer of Doctor Who, asked the story editor, Andrew Cartmell, to write a monologue to end the episode on, to give it a more satisfying conclusion. On September 11th, John Nathan Turner informed Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred that their contracts would not be renewed for the 27th season of Doctor Who. According to the BBC, the show was not cancelled per se, it was having a rest, which is a very polite way of saying it's cancelled without dealing with a fan backlash. The final episode of the original run of Doctor Who aired on the 23rd of November 1989, exactly 26 years since the first ever episode, An Unearthly Child, was broadcast. But it was far from being all over. In the current era of endless reboots, reimagining and franchises, the idea of Doctor Who not being produced can be quite surprising. Well, even though Doctor Who was not on television, it was still a hot ticket item. The same year it was cancelled, a producer from Columbia Pictures, Philip Siegel, approached the BBC about co-producing Doctor Who, a concept similar to how BBC Studios and Bad Wolf are co-producing Doctor Who from 2023 onwards. The BBC were concerned about bringing the show back so soon, and eventually plans fell apart. But when Siegel moved to Amblin Entertainment, Steven Spielberg's company, he maintained contact. But it wasn't until he moved to Universal that the potential revival began to gain traction. By 1994, an agreement was reached, and it was up to Siegel to develop the future of Doctor Who. Trevor Walton, the vice president of Fox Television Movie Production, became interested in the project. Although he couldn't commission a series, he could commission a TV movie, which could then act as a backdoor pilot. This project is what is commonly referred to as the TV movie, Doctor Who, or The Enemy Within, depending on who you ask. Paul McGann debuted as the 8th Doctor on the Fox network in America on the 14th of May 1996, and 13 days later on BBC One in the UK. The TV movie had a successful launch of 9 million viewers on BBC One, but had only 5.5 million viewers in the United States. Unfortunately, since this was largely an American production, Fox decided to decline the option for a series due to low ratings. And by 1997, Universal's full production rights to Doctor Who returned to the BBC. And once again, Doctor Who faded into a relic of pop culture. A cheap joke, but for fans, it was not forgotten. By the late 90s, many of the higher-ups who held disdain for Doctor Who at the BBC had long since moved on. New talent, people with fond memories of the show, began to occupy these positions. In October 1997, Mal Young was appointed head of drama series, who hired Patrick Spence as the head of drama department. Mal Young was interested in bringing the show back. Patrick Spence had recently met someone who he thought would be perfect for the job, Russell T Davies. Russell had been working on the upcoming Channel 4 drama Queer as Folk, a revolutionary show featuring the lives of 3 gay men living in Manchester, which met critical acclaim. It was well known that Russell was a big Doctor Who fan, and Spence believed attaching him to Doctor Who would convince him to work for the BBC. Mal Young and the BBC One controller of programs, Peter Salmon, approved of this idea. This project was known as Doctor Who 2000. Unfortunately, this was never meant to be. At this time, BBC Films had the rights to create a Doctor Who movie, and therefore, a television show could not be made. At one point, even Miramax was attached to the project. Paul W.S. Anderson, director of Mortal Kombat and Event Horizon, were attached to the project also. But this film also never materialised. And over the years, people at the BBC came and left. Doctor Who's return came so close and disappeared once again. It wasn't until Russell T Davies was at a press launch for Linda Green where he met an ally, Jane Tranter. Tranter had been appointed as head of drama serials at the BBC in 2000 and also shared a love for Doctor Who. She wanted Russell to be the producer, and Doctor Who was commissioned. Well, not exactly. Jane was currently pregnant with twins and was about to take maternity leave. Doctor Who was once again on hold. Davies continued to meet with BBC executives to discuss his vision for Doctor Who. His early ideas centered around a companion who was an office cleaner, who encountered a dinosaur in the basement of the place that she worked. The Doctor would arrive and save her using a window cleaner's cradle. I wonder if Russell would use that idea later on. Russell and Jane weren't the only people interested in bringing Doctor Who back. Dan Friedman, a producer of the 2001 webcast Death Comes to Time, was campaigning for a new incarnation of the Doctor to be played by Stephen Fry on BBC Two. Unlike the webcasts, which were a limited form of animation, these were to be live-action episodes, designed to appeal to the cult audience such as fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This project never came to pass. In 2002, 3 writers, Mark Gatiss, Clayton Hickman, and Gareth Roberts, came together to pitch their vision of Doctor Who to the BBC, a series of 21 half-hour episodes with a Doctor with memory issues, and their companions, a police officer called Dan and a university student named Holly. This project also never came to pass. But all of these writers eventually went on to write for the 2005 revival or the Sarah Jane Adventures. Most of these roadblocks centered around the BBC Films rights situation. So what did that mean for Doctor Who? By 2003, Lorraine Heggessey, the new controller of BBC One, was becoming impatient with BBC Films. it had been years, and BBC Films hadn't gotten closer producing a new Doctor Who film, and argued that it was time that the production rights were handed back to BBC Drama. But there was someone else creating new Doctor Who at the BBC, and had been for quite some time. An online division of the BBC were creating webcasts. These projects included the aforementioned 2001's Death Comes to Time, 2002's Real Time featuring the 6th Doctor, 2003's Shada featuring the 8th Doctor. But for the 40th anniversary, they decided on a much more ambitious project, where they got the chance to cast their own 9th Doctor, played by Richard E. Grant. BBC I claimed this to be the official continuation of the series, but that idea wouldn't last much longer. Hegarty discovered that researcher Daniel Judd and producer Helena Georgievic, who had worked on the BBC I projects, had published an article on the Doctor Who website explaining the complicated Doctor Who rights situation. They concluded that there were no legal barriers stopping the BBC from creating new Doctor Who. This meant that Hegarty could commission a new live-action series to be broadcast on BBC One. The BBC I team were completely unaware that in writing this article, they destroyed their future project. Meanwhile, at BBC Wales, Julie Gardner, who was the new head of drama, met with Jane Tranter to discuss making a formal approach to Russell T Davies to create a new series of Doctor Who. Russell was on vacation in France when he received a call from Julie Gardner, and after many false starts, Davies was dubious, but Julie's enthusiasm and the fact that they would be filming in Cardiff excited him. On the 24th of September, Lorraine Hegarty officially commissioned a new series of Doctor Who. Davies, Gardner, Tranter and Young would be the executive producers. Doctor Who was back. After many false starts, Doctor Who was finally returning to BBC One. Not as an animation, not as a TV movie, but a proper season of Doctor Who. But what would Doctor Who look like in the 21st century? It was agreed early on that the episodes would be 45 minutes long, which they had hoped would intrigue the international market. Doctor Who, in its initial incarnation, was broadcast as serials. Many Doctor Who fans refer to these individual serials as stories. For example, the 1979 story, The Horns of Nimon, has 4 episodes. One continuous story is told over these 4 episodes. The 2021 Doctor Who series Flux is an example of a serial. Jane Tranter and Mel Young wanted 3 two-parters, making 6 episodes in total, to continue the classic cliffhangers Doctor Who was famous for. Davies and Gardner argued to make the series have standalone episodes, and a few two-parters along the way. The team agreed on this by November of 2003. Now that the format was set, what would a 21st century companion look like? The public image of what makes a Doctor Who companion wasn't the most positive. Stereotypes of screaming young women, running in high heels, and making tea was the general consensus. Even though at times there was some more positive storyline for Doctor Who companions, it was decided that this stereotype would not be followed. The original concept featured the Doctor travelling with an elderly grandfather, whose pension of friends would sometimes come along to help, which I think is really cute. I wonder if Russell would use that idea later on. But eventually, his initial ideas from previous years would return, using the concept of the office cleaner. This character became known as Rose Tyler, the first name coming from Russell's sitcom, Bob and Rose, and the last name he had used in various projects, such as Revelations, The Second Coming, and the 1996 Doctor Who novel, Damaged Goods. Rose would be the centerpiece of the first episode, even the episode being named after her. The original title was Rose Meets the Doctor, which was shortened to just Rose, mainly because Meets the Doctor was a terrible last name. I'm sorry, that was a terrible joke. The setting was to be at a department store where Rose worked. She would encounter the Autons, a race of plastic robots that were controlled by the nesting consciousness. The Autons were created by Robert Holmes and originally appeared in the 1970s stories Spearhead from Space and Terror of the Autons. Jane Tranter thought that the Daleks would be the obvious monsters to appear in the first episode, but Russell believed that they would be perfect for a mid-series rating bump, and therefore the Autons were chosen instead. In the 15-page pitch document, Russell laid out a few of his intentions with the program. It was decided that the show would continue where the 8th Doctor left off, but the regeneration between them happened quite some time earlier to the first episode, Rose. He also explained how it was to mix science fiction elements with emotion and relationships, emulating American shows such as Charmed, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He also outlined things that he wanted to return, such as the sonic screwdriver, first seen in Fury from the Deep, which was phased out in The Visitation. He even discussed bringing back K9, the Doctor's robotic dog companion. I wonder if Russell would use that idea later on. The Doctor is not an easy role to cast, especially at this point where there had only been 8 Doctors, not including the others. It's hard to believe that such a small number of actors had played the Doctor at this point, since in 2021 every man and his dog in the UK has played Doctor Who. But in 2004, it was new territory. The Doctor is known to be quite an eccentrically dressed individual. How would that play against other shows that are currently being broadcast? And what type of actor could pull that off? The role was initially offered to Hugh Grant, an incredibly high-profile star. He even appeared as the Doctor in the 1999 Children in Need production of The Curse of Fatal Death, which was a parody of Doctor Who written by Stephen Moffat. Russell didn't have him in mind for the Doctor, but felt like the prestige coming from his star power would be beneficial for the show. But Grant declined the role. Bill Nighy was heavily rumoured to be taking on the role, even getting to the point where The Guardian announced him as the Doctor on the same day they announced the real Doctor. On March 20th, 2004, Christopher Eccleston was announced as the 9th Doctor, a hero for a whole new generation. Eccleston and Davies had worked together previously on The Second Coming, and was initially suggested by Mal Young. After he auditioned, the team narrowed it down to 3 actors, and they decided that Christopher Eccleston was the right match. The fact the show is still going to this day is a testament of Chris's acting ability and the production team's decision. The eccentric costumes of previous years were discarded in favour of a more contemporary low-key approach. A beaten-up leather jacket, simple black trousers, a plain shirt and boots. The outfit was designed by Lucinda Wright. But what about Rose Tyler? Who would portray the Doctor's latest travelling companion? Early on, eyes were on pop singer turned actor Billie Piper. Another candidate was Georgia Moffat, the daughter of Peter Davison, the 5th Doctor, and eventual wife of David Tennant, the 10th Doctor. And yes, it's as confusing as it sounds. But ultimately, on May 21st, Billie Piper would be cast as Rose Tyler, and history was made. Or was it? On the 22nd of June, a threat posed itself on Doctor Who yet again. Do you remember Michael Grade, the person behind the 1985 hiatus? Well, he had taken up the role of chairman on the BBC Board of Governors on May 17th, and immediately set his sights on eliminating Doctor Who. He contacted the new Director General of the BBC, Mark Thompson, who began inquiring if it was too late to cancel Doctor Who. The production team argued that it was too late, and if they backed out now, it would look like a waste of resources and give the BBC a bad look. And just like that, Doctor Who was back on track once again. Television production had changed a lot since 1985, And speaking of which, television has changed a lot since 2005. Largely, the classic series of Doctor Who was recorded serial by serial. The new series would be shot in production blocks. This means that in each block, a single team would be in charge of the episodes within it. These blocks were determined based on sets, locations, and actor availability. One of the first people approached to direct Block 1 was Edgar Wright, famous for 2004's Shaun of the Dead, but he was unavailable. Eventually the role went to Keith Bowick. It was decided to film the series in standard definition, on digital Betacam format. Possibly, in my opinion, the biggest crime in Doctor Who history. I could rant about Doctor Who's lack of image quality, but we'd be here all day. They justified this incorrect decision because they thought high definition, which was commonplace in television by this point. Sorry, I'll stop. They thought that high definition would be a strain on the visual effects department. And to that I say, get good. Okay, I'll stop now. To maintain secrecy around the series, the tapes would be shipped with the label Torchwood, an anagram of Doctor Who. I wonder if Russell would use that idea later on. On July 18th, 2004, recording for Doctor Who began in the UK for the first time in over a decade. The series concluded filming in March 2005, with its first episode to be broadcast by the end of that month, which is quite a hefty turnaround. On Saturday, the 26th of March, Rose was broadcast on BBC One with an average audience of 10.8 million viewers, the highest rating for Doctor Who since The Creature from the Pit. The appreciation index reached 76%, the highest the show had ever reached at that point. And after a very long rest, Doctor Who was back, and it's about time. So, that was the story of how Doctor Who returned to the screen. I tried to not overcomplicate it and just highlight the exciting stuff. I avoided the day-to-day filming schedules because that's worthy of a video of itself, which I'll probably never make because it would be far too daunting. But thank you for watching, and don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nez YouTube channel. Alright, well, that took fucking forever.